Hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to ISC Squared's APAC webinar Wednesday. My name is Clayton Jones, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. At ISC Squared, we host these webinars to help keep our membership up to date on issues that affect the security landscape. And we hope through these webinars, we are able to help towards your knowledge, and as we work to improve the security posture of the organizations we serve. This afternoon's webinar, which is titled Best Practices on Operational Efficiency in Network Security, will be presented by Michael Ferguson of ForcePoint. Michael is the Strategic Security Solutions Consultant for the Australia-New Zealand region at ForcePoint. He has been a cybersecurity professional for over 10 years and has worked in both the UK and Australia. Michael specializes in deploying data loss prevention and insider threat protection projects for large enterprise accounts, as well as working to align best-of-breed on-premise and cloud security technologies with ASD and ISM standards. As the Strategic Security Solutions Consultant at ForcePoint, Michael works with large organizations and government agencies to define what security strategies and solutions are required to protect the things that matter most to their business. Michael will also be assisted by ForcePoint's Network Security Business Manager, Sam Duckett, and their Global Technical Training Manager, Matt McKinley, during the Q&A session. So, please keep those questions coming. Before I hand over to Michael, I would just like to go through some housekeeping. So all ISC Squared members would qualify for one CPE, and this will be automatically applied to your account. So, there's no need for you to go and enter the CPE. The webinar will consist of, say, around a 45 to 50-minute presentation from Michael, and will be followed by Q&A time, where he'll be joined by Sam and Matt. You can ask questions at any time, so if you look at the Q&A box below, just enter your questions, and at the end of the presentation, I will have them addressed by Michael and his team. You will also notice that ForcePoint has provided 2 documents, which you can download on the attachment, from the attachment icon. These documents, one is a white paper, which is titled Network Management and Operational Efficiency. The other is a brochure on ForcePoint STONESOFT Next Generation Firewall. So without any further ado, I'd hand you over to Michael. Okay, Michael, you're on.
Hello, and thank you for that warm introduction. Really appreciate all of you taking the time today to listen to us talk about best practices on operational efficiency in network security. So, as mentioned previously, I'm Mike Ferguson, Strategic Security Solutions Consultant for ForcePoint, and I've been at the organization for a long time, basically working with organizations to ensure that operational efficiency is met and that we're aligning with those business strategies set forward by those businesses and our customers. So hopefully I'm well placed to assist you in providing those best practices. The session today is going to follow this agenda. Ultimately, we want to define what are key operational tasks within network security. It's very important if we are going to provide best practices on what we're trying to accomplish. We have to say, well, what are we doing, and what are those tasks that do take up so much of our resources and our time and our money, and have those impacts on us. And what are those key tasks that we do from a network security perspective that we can hope to define and put in place some best practices for? Then we need to know, well, what's the impact on this? How do we, if we're going to define methods to improve it, we need to say, well, not just what those tasks are, but what would be the impact if we were to set up operationally inefficient tasks and processes and practices around each of those individual tasks. And we'll talk a bit more about that. And then finally, once we know the problem properly, we can say, well, okay, for each of those, what would be the best practices that I can do, hopefully from a non-technical perspective, or certainly an agnostic perspective, to deliver operational efficiency for my organization. So on that, we're going to get started. And the first section is defining what those key operational tasks are in network security. And ultimately, the key things that we're thinking about, you put them into little sort of categories of what takes up our time. And the first and foremost is deployment. I mean, deployment of a new system is always going to take up a lot of time. Policy updates and then firewall upgrades, firmware upgrades. That's all setup and maintenance and just the general management of this stuff. And that takes up so much of our time. That doesn't really account for then the remediation. Well, if we have an outage or, heaven forbid, an actual intrusion, and we have to remediate that as quickly as possible, and how do we deal with that? And that's obviously something that we're going to have to deal with. And then the other element, the side that people don't really talk about too much, when they, certainly you deal with network administrators. It's the business side of it, reporting, dealing with it, making it a business tool is an integral part of the business. So we need to make sure we're getting the right information out of it. And then procurement. I mean, how much of our time is spent dealing with just like understanding what's right for me and how do I deal with that. So making that efficient is going to be awesome as well. So just to talk a bit more about each of those different components. I mean, setting up a firewall in itself, you've got remote users, mobile devices, you've got headquarters, all those different applications. You've got to connect it to the internet. So setting up that by itself is one thing that takes up a lot of time, but that doesn't even go into, what happens when we have multiple locations, and each of those locations need those things as well, and you've got this huge mesh of, communication channels that need to be configured, need to be set up, and you can start to understand that there's a lot of stuff going on here for each of those locations, and making sure that we are finding operationally efficient ways to do that is going to be pretty useful. Next up is policy updates. So you're essentially how are you as an administrator going to respond to those multiple requests that come from the business, to keep various stakeholders within the business happy. You've got new security incidents going in. You've got new applications. You've got the business saying, we're reorganizing. We need to update the configuration of these policies and the way the traffic flows. And then, we've got security updates. We need to patch the systems. And you're this one guy trying to find out, how do I set up the policies to all these different boxes? So you can understand that that's going to take up a lot of time as well. And then finally, the next one is upgrades. You've got multiple boxes running different versions in data centers, in your headquarters, and in remote offices. It very quickly starts to dawn upon you, just upgrading these boxes to be the latest version is going to start to become a serious operational headache, let alone overhead, for any administrator. And that's regardless of whether or not you've got multiple locations. Just keeping things up to date can start to cause headaches. Outage remediation. So it's not just like if one device goes down, how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to route the traffic? But what happens if I've got connections that go down as well? That's going to be a serious concern for myself. I might have multiple service providers. I might have multiple links. What happens if one of those goes down? What are the services on there? And then finally, management. How much of my business is dealt with reporting and policy updates. You've got all that stuff before. How am I going to respond best in the event that the management has these, the manager or the reporting servers, go down at any point? And that's, how do I deal with that quickly and effectively is going to be very important to delivering the right service. And then, of course, the nasty outsider, develops some nasty piece of malware that one of my users accesses. It goes through my firewalls. Then I've got to not only remediate that, but I've also got to remediate the firewall. I've got to determine which of these boxes has been infected, where did the malware come from, how can I best remediate it, and then you've got all of those extra pieces where if a breach occurs, I got to let my customers know, I got to let the press know, my partners, the impact on an organization from a business standpoint very quickly starts to ramp up. And then you've got the additional dollars that go into implementing future controls. So very easily, very easy to understand that maybe having some operational efficiency in this area is going to be very, very useful. Reporting. So we've got businesses that are using more and more, web applications. You have more and more organizations moving their users around so that they can make quick decisions on mobile devices and laptops. And then, of course, there is, as we mentioned before, this increased risk landscape that it has more and more of these threats that are going to start taking our information. So we need to be able to provide reporting so that we are enabling the business. We are not falling victim to the threat that this ultimately provides us, as well as maybe providing some risk management and say this is where I think the risk might be based on the information being stored in these applications. But being really clever with this kind of stuff from a business level and making it easy for the organization to get the information so that they can make quick decisions. You need to start to understand inefficiencies here are going to have impacts not immediately, but later on. That's ultimately very, very important. And the next is procurement. So how much of our time is actually spent on procuring these firewalls? So that's really important. If we've got third-party analysts, we've got the guys doing the actual evaluations of our systems. Even then you start to go, well, that's going to take up so much of my time. And then, of course, you've got resource availability. Do I have the monies, the dollars, the time to just deal with procuring another piece of hardware? And that ultimately is, where we're getting a lot of, spending a lot of our time. So those are ultimately our tasks that we're trying to provide some efficiency around. Now we're going to say, well, what's the impact on that, those individual tasks, and what would be the impact of having operational inefficiencies? And I think this is where we can start to really drill into where we're going to have to put in place some controls and operationally efficient tasks. But if you've got deployments, and especially if you've got multiple locations, the impact on time is very apparent. You've got to get this set up. You've got to get this set up very, very quickly. Maybe you've got travel times to get users to these different locations. Ultimately, if you've got multiple links to each of those servers, the VPN connections to each of those different locations often require things like manual connections. And that just takes up a lot of time. The resources are just going to have to, be moving around, or you're going to have to get huge project overheads and management guys to assist in this, and that just comes together with a lot of cost to that. And the big impact on that is if you've got guys setting up those policies in all those different locations, there's another issue here. So from a security perspective, if you've got a distributed network, the security impact on that is that you've got to set up manual policies on each of my individual systems, and that causes overhead. That causes potential gaps. You don't get consistency across each of those different areas. So, if you're manually adjusting, during business hours, and that causes an outage as well, that's going to be a big impact. But even if it goes well, you've got to do that in each of those locations manually, and that causes, concerns. But even, if you've got to do updates on, each of those different servers itself, not just from a security perspective, that just takes time. It causes issues to on resources just to try and get them all rolled out. Or you have to write complicated scripts to try to automate that type of process, which has its own issues. And that's very similar to the firmware, the actual firmware upgrading. There's time, if you've got downtime on your systems, that's something that becomes very visible to the organization itself. So that's absolutely something that we shouldn't be providing. We should try to avoid, I guess. So, time on upgrades is very, very bad. And again, I mean, you're often having to do this kind of stuff out of hours. So you're going to get your resources to work out of hours or get professional services involved, and the cost just starts to go up. And often what we do is we end up not doing this stuff because we are, because of the amount of time that it takes, and that's where the issue lies. And ultimately, if you're that means that we don't upgrade systems. That means that we've got those gaps in the system, and that's obviously the biggest issue to our organization. Now, the next is those outages. I mean, whether it's device or connectivity, we know that outages, just to remediate that, to try and find where the issue is, that's essentially something that is going to cause us, time to remediate. We have to not only find where the issue comes from, but how do I redirect traffic afterwards? I've been told that there's a problem with my audio, so I've taken myself off speaker, and hopefully this is a lot easier for you. But please let me know. I'll take the feedback. But ultimately, what we're trying to say is, from a outage remediation perspective, once something, whether it's your device or one of your connections goes down, there is an issue with. Okay, can anyone hear me? Should I continue?
I can hear you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Okay. So I'm just getting notes from the administrators, but I'll continue. So ultimately, what I'm saying is that when you have a device that goes down, or one of your connections to the ISPs, the money that is the time that is lost in determining where this occurred has impact on the business itself. The business is unable to operate. That becomes very visible to yourselves. That means that you might put additional resources, or load onto additional firewalls, and you've got a significant amount of knock-on effects there. Now, intrusion remediation. I mean, this is something that we all understand the impact of that, but just trying to determine how a breach occurred and reducing the dwell time of that, is something that's substantial. It's something that is something that is very hard to determine. So we need to be able to find that we don't have the resources dedicated to performing those specific forensics investigations into how do I detect who was, how did that malware get into my organization? How did that data, how was it extracted? On what systems are breached and require the remediation methods? So that's something that is very hard to determine. It's very easy to understand some of the impacts immediately, because again, that's something that the business is going to be very, very aware of. And then, of course, that's something that requires the lots of money, whether it's third-party analysts to come in and provide you with some additional manpower, to determine where the intrusion came from, and then hopefully plug the hole with additional controls. There's additional costing on that as well. So making it very, very efficient in some of the methods for determining that would be very valuable. The reporting, business reporting, it makes a lot of sense. You need to be able to make quick decisions. The firewall is a fantastic and integral part of your network. We have to have these things in place to keep the lights on, as it were. But that means that it gets great visibility into all this wonderful traffic and information that goes on. So we need to be able to deliver those reports to each of those business areas very, very quickly. And if we don't have it configured correctly, that's something that we're going to lose out on. We're not going to be able to make those quick decisions. That means that we need to be able to configure it in a way that allows us to get increased visibility into how my business is operating, and maybe how it's not operating, and some of the things that we can do to plug on that. And I think that is quite easy to see where the time is taken up doing that. And then finally on procurement. So time's quite easily taken up when it comes to running an evaluation. You've got to define success criteria and get the manpower to run, the resources to run an evaluation. You've got to get the resources. The actual network has to be configured in a way that allows people to, an administrator to run the evaluation itself. You need to get the ticks of success from third-party analysts. That kind of stuff, it takes a lot of time. Otherwise, you're doing it yourself, and it takes money on, from a resource perspective, on things that you would normally be doing otherwise. So that's very very difficult as well. And of course, from a security perspective, lowest pricing, with no proper validation or evaluation, that means that you're not going to be meeting the security requirements that are required in today's landscape. So a lot of areas here where all those different tasks, if not configured correctly, can potentially cause serious knock-on impacts onto the business, whether it's time, resources, money, and security. So that's something that we've got to try to find clever ways to provide operationally efficient methods to protect our networks. And that's what I'm going to talk about in the final section of the presentation. So now these are the best practices to deliver operational efficiency, and this is something hopefully now the audio is working okay. But what do we mean by operationally efficient? I mean, it has to fit in with the life cycle and the workflow of your organization. So we go through this life cycle of deploying the hardware, updating things, remediating, reporting, maintaining, and this is just part of normal workflow that allows our business to be as dynamic as we can. And any one of these individual inefficiencies has a knock-on to the next stage. And we kind of saw that when we talk about the business impact. A lot of these things kind of link together when it comes to, if we say, well, I need to have resources to update my policies in multiple locations. Well, that means I've got to move a guy around. That takes time. Then it's going to, have a knock-on impact onto, how much money I'm spending. Maybe I've got to get, I'm using up his time. The money that I'm paying him anyway to update policies where I could be using him for other things. So they all have these kind of knock-on effects, and I think that's what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to the operationally efficient task, is keeping this life cycle and this workflow flowing in an effective manner so that it doesn't have knock-on effects to the next stage. And one of the easiest ones for this, is when it comes to deployment. Ultimately what we need to do is, find a very easy method that will allow us to, carbon copy almost the configuration from, one location to another. Whether or not that's a safe configuration, and you can copy that to, whether it's on USB, or other means, from one location to another, so that you can get a firewall in these
remote locations up and running, as quickly as possible with the basic configuration so that they can communicate back to the your centralized manager. You're carbon copying, and that allows you to then say, well, I know that this configuration works. I know that this has proven track record. I don't have to manually do this. So I'm going to use that hard work that I've done already and copy that to another firewall. Whether or not you can, there are ways of using cloud components for this as well. So if you have some of the technologies that allow that, that's really going to cut down the deployment time from days, weeks to minutes. And ultimately, once it's communicating with that next gen, with your centralized management console, that's when you can start to do all the other bits and pieces. But I think that that's a really useful way of saying, well, let me copy what the policies I've got on in one location. I know that it's working. Push them to the other locations, and that's going to make it a lot better, a lot quicker. Scheduled tasks. I mean, this is something that seems really underutilized at the moment. It doesn't have to just be reporting. Reports can be scheduled, of course, so management gets their understanding of who's spending all their time on Facebook. That's important. But we can do this with other things as well, right? Like, whether it's policy updates. If you've got your marketing department saying they've got this new application that's going to go live this date and it needs access to these protocols, you go, okay, perfect. Well, you tell me the time, you tell me the configuration, and I'll push that out at at this particular time. And it's one of those things that's very underutilized, especially if you aren't trusting the technology that you've got in place. That can be a concern, but that's something with the technology. We need to say, well, I want to schedule the task so that it's not taking up the man hours. It's not taking up my resources, and it can even be done with upgrades to the firewalls themselves. So if you need to put in place some firmware upgrades, it can be done on a scheduled basis. Now, obviously, when it comes to upgrades, it's most likely going to be done after hours. But at the same time, it is something. If it's a small upgrade, if it's just patching of a small, a smaller release, then maybe you don't need somebody there, and you've got high availability in place. Why do we schedule that? And as I say, as it says here, it'll actually give you a 70% in time saving alone, which is huge. Maybe that's this is where we're spending a lot of our time, and we could schedule the smaller stuff to make it easier on your administrators. Okay, so make use of your existing hardware. So this is really important. So, if you've got hardware in one location, and it's being utilized as, say, an IPS, I want to actually take that, move it to another location so that, I don't have to go through the whole procurement process. I don't have to, worry about the resources of money and, time to go through that. But I've gone through that already anyway. So why don't I take that bit of kit that I've got in place, repurpose it. Almost everyone seems to, every administrator I speak to has a bit of kit that's sitting in his, on a shelf somewhere that he hasn't used. And there are ways in which that we can repurpose that to fit the requirements of the organization. That allows us to be a bit more dynamic. That allows us to do all the things that we say we want to be. Just finding what resources you've got available, and being clever with it, being smart. Say, okay, well, maybe I want to repurpose that to now be my VPN connection and put it to work on those types of things. And there are systems out there that will allow you to do that in a smart way from a unified software core or simplified licensing models, and that's absolutely something that that's our role, to look for those types of technologies that can provide us that that type of capability. And next one is the delegated administration. So this is so underutilized. We always talk about delegated administration, but you have a distributed network. I mean, you might even have distributed management portals, but you need to configure this so that you can allow your inexperienced network administrators access to manage their local firewalls with certain tasks. that are low risk to your organization, so that when it comes to configuring updates for their particular region, those administrators can do so. If you've got certain administrators that you don't want messing with policy, but you want to be able to run ad hoc reports, you need to be able to configure that. And even using role-based access control. So it's the next-gen firewall, so it's integrated with Active Directory. We should be using that so that we can set up departmental administration. This guy can report, or maybe even set up policies for these guys. That should be available in the settings, and that's again reducing the overhead on that firewall system administrator. Perfect one. I mean, if we had to go to the marketplace and try to figure out the right way to set up a secure, robust, highly available next generation firewall or firewall network, this is something that's going to take so much time and effort. So using the those standards that are available to us, the ISO 22301. This is something. It's a standard that helps ensure continuity of service. What that means, the continuity of service, is disaster recovery. How do I get my system back up as quickly as possible? And not just that, but highly available. How do I ensure that it doesn't go down in the first place? And this standard is, obviously, ISO is international accreditation, but look to those standards, those industry standards. And there are others, and we'll talk a bit more about analysts and their recommendations later. But use those standards that are available to you to align yourself with what's important and what are the right ways of doing things. So policy updates. This is potentially my favorite. I think this is absolutely something that's going to be crucial to delivering a really effective or operationally efficient network security. Is use templates. Templates prevent the likelihood of mistakes because changes are needed in fewer places. Changes to a global like a global template, then propagated to all the policies, and that lowers the amount of work that's needed from administrators, but also your security is increased because that particular policy works. You can use things like aliases to ensure that the same policy can be utilized in a global deployment. This is very, very important to ensure that you are getting that very robust, secure, and consistent policy application across the network. And that also means that you only have to make a single change to the top tier of a hierarchical policy. If you've got a top tier, and that can be pushed down to all of those other policies to say this is a global change. You can then make regional changes, but it absolutely, this cuts down on the number of policies that are being managed and lowers human resource consumption. And obviously, using a global template is exactly the same as using a siloed or single policy in each of those different locations. It will not cost you anything, and you finding clever ways to do that is going to be very, very important. And the next one is firewall upgrades. So obviously, centralized schedule updates. I mean, having something that provides you with a central location to push out upgrades to each of those individual locations, each of those individual firewalls, and understand that if you've set up your something that's highly available, has built-in load balancing or load tolerance, what that's going to provide for you is the ability to push out upgrades outside of those normal times where you'd have to do it outside of business hours. You can do this during business hours if you've got those types of things in place. So putting in place fault tolerance in your technology, or even rollback capabilities. So if you push it in and it doesn't really work, you want to be able to roll back. Having that type of that process built into any change control is going to be crucial to you delivering a very efficient rollout or upgrade of those particular policies. Okay, now clustering is kind of one of those really interesting components. Now, what we're trying to say when we say clustering, I mean, if you're going to implement or talk about operational inefficiencies, what we need to do is ensure that putting in place something beforehand is going to be a lot more effective than trying to remediate afterwards. And clustering is a great way of doing that. So you want to put in place clusters. You need to put in place active clusters, not just because your firewall is going to share the load and the resources, so you're going to get a better, more bang for your buck out of those firewalls, but ultimately, in the event that something does go wrong and one of those firewalls does, give up, you have that fault tolerance. And it should be doing that, as I say, active. It should be transparent failover. You do not want the business being aware of that. And because of that, it means that you can do those seamless upgrades. It means that from a policy upgrade perspective, if something is wrong, you can push, or when you're upgrading to a new firmware version, your traffic continues to remain active. It is a robust network. And there's no interruptions. I think that that's something that absolutely should be part of every single environment, because it's one of those things that will provide you with that operationally efficient networks. Outage remediation again. So one of the things that you can do, I think it's a really interesting way of doing it, even if it actually takes up initial undertaking, is to dedicate specific pipe for specific needs or traffic. If you've got you might have things like MPLS traffic, which is an MPLS network for your entire network, but that's very costly. We can actually say, well, wouldn't it be useful to have a ADSL or a cable network that is not, that we only use for specific data types. So the non-critical stuff doesn't have to go over the MPLS, which is a costly connection. So obviously there are certain technologies out there that would allow you to move away from the command line component. But even if you are using the command line for configuring this, putting in place those controls or that type of communication, that type of configuration early on is going to provide you with, that quality of service that you require. And as I say, quality of service pulls into the reduces on the potential for an outage. Because you're saying this particular traffic, which is important to me, gets the quality it requires. I find that you can do, whether you do that via command line or via the technology that is able to do that dynamically. Very, very important for providing that. So as I say, a few things about that, like resilience before beats mitigation after. So ensuring that you've got the clustering in place, you've got that fault tolerance built in, is going to deliver you with that resilience that you need within your network, so that you can provide live updates during business hours for your network. Connectivity resilience, so having mesh networks from multiple points to multiple points allows you to maintain network uptime. And you're not beholden to your ISP. I mean, it means that you can move the traffic around. If you're dedicating certain pipes to certain pieces of certain connections, that allows you to be smart with your traffic and provide the quality of service that is required. But then you probably want to have, maybe you want to have centralized management so that you can push up policies, on that hierarchical, those hierarchical templates to multiple locations. But you might want to have, multiple management consoles so that in the event that one goes down, you can roll over management and configuration, centrally to a second location. So having sort of a secondary management console, or even reporting management in different locations, maybe even like web-based portals as well, just so that you can again do that delegated administration. Say these guys are going to use this, but it just also means that you're resilient in the event that one of these systems goes down. You are able to put in place you're able to continue, that business continuity continues. And as I say, it's all about resilience before. So you got to put in place that little extra, work to ensure that you are resilient before something actually goes wrong. So another one from an intrusion remediation perspective, what's kind of interesting is you want to have all those different components linking together. Like, the firewall is this integral part of the network. It's going to see all these different types of traffic. And being an next-gen firewall, absolutely, it's going to look at all the different layers. We need to be able to normalize the traffic internally and apply different policies to it. But there are specialty products as well that you should be able to leverage so that you can dedicate your sandbox capability as well, because we're going to see that traffic. We should send certain pieces of traffic to the sandbox. We need to connect to a global intelligence network so that when we get hit from something nasty, we share that information with the rest of the network, and we're able to lean on the rest of that community and get those updates as quickly as possible when they fall victim to something. So that's very, very important. And then of course things like IPS and antivirus detection, all that kind of stuff should be built into the system, ultimately available in simplified licensing, tick box type of enablement on the single firewall. So if you've got all of that consolidated, it just means that the remediation time, the visibility of all those nasties is available to you as quickly as possible. Quick one on reporting. So dashboards are a really great way of providing you with that analytics of what's going on. We talk about the delegated administration. You need to be able to set up dashboards that give you that business level information as to what's happening within the organization, but also from an administrator perspective. That's not what I'm interested in. I want to know which of my firewalls are up and which of my systems are down so that I can make quick remediation of that. So that's something that absolutely should be tiered when it comes to the delegated administration. So having various different dashboards for the different operators or administrators of that firewall should be very quick to access. It allows you very simple drill down, of course, as well, very important, so that I can click into one of those things that's firing up and is of interest to me, and I can get more information into that. But then, I want, from an auditing perspective, I need to have summaries that go to, so I can look at trending information as well, across, a set period of time, so that I can, get the information that matters to me. And if you've got a system that allows templating, so that you can use similar templates across different business areas, then your delegated administrators can get the information that matters to them and their business. They're not looking at all the other traffic, but it's just, they're not looking at the other business areas. They're looking at the information that matters to them, but you're sharing the templates themselves of those reports, the templates themselves of those dashboards, so that you're going to only have to configure those once or twice rather than multiple times. And that's obviously sends you a lot of information. Security and efficacy. So one of the most important things is to go to market. Look at the various analysts in the marketplace that are going to give you the feedback as to who are the right who are the top security-focused next-generation firewalls. It means you don't have to rely on doing all of the different testing around this yourselves. And just try to leverage off some of the hard work that other people have done as well. That's obviously going to reduce some of the hard time. And again, it comes to certifications. If you want to make sure that you trust one of the, trust the technology that you are putting in place, and it absolutely makes sense that you are looking to things that align, firewall that aligns with common criteria. It aligns with FIPS so that you trust the cryptographic modules, that are being used to secure this connection. Absolutely needs to have the highest level of security certifications, available so that you can trust that it is capable of protecting the information that matters most to your organization. Of course, it is a key part of your infrastructure, but it's also a security tool, so it should be aligning with those things that matter most, and are also trusted within the highest level of government. So, some of the highlights on this, from a procurement perspective, if you are able to provide, technology, get technology that is able to give you the reporting so that you can respond as best as possible. It gives you a improvement of 84% in response time. The decrease in security-related downtime. If you've got the firewalls listed configured in a fault-tolerant way with the clustering that has been outlined and mentioned, you're going to reduce your downtime by 94%, which is a huge amount of time saving. That's cost savings, and resource saving as well for your organization. And if you're able to use similar hardware that you've got lying around, you're able to, for different purposes, what you're able to do is save yourself on the costs, 30% of costs to be specific. And obviously that's a huge saving by looking at what I've got, auditing the hardware that I have available to myself, to you, and using it for different means. Ultimately, if you're looking at some of this stuff, if you're implementing, some of these controls in place, what this is going to provide you, over time is a return on investment. That's a 527% return on investment by implementing operationally efficient controls or processes. Will give you a huge return on investment, and that's absolutely something that, from a procurement perspective, is something that we're looking to ensure. I mean, you're getting the right payback over even 6 months. So you're using the technology you've got available to you in an operationally efficient way, in the way that has been outlined, can give you a payback on the technology that you've procured over 6 months. Now, just on that, obviously, from a force point perspective, the STONESOFT Next Generation Firewall does provide unrivaled centralized management and operational efficiency in there. One of the key reasons that people choose and stick with ForcePoint's Next Generation Firewall is because of its operational efficiency. The ability to put in place advanced security with rich context security policies, built-in data exfiltration capabilities, and that flexible administration and reporting capabilities is crucial to providing your organization with the advanced security it requires. And then, of course, optimization, the ability to cluster firewalls regardless of their make or model, or even the firmware version that they are using. That's going to allow you to trust the workflow that you've got in place. It allows you to trust the fault tolerance capabilities that you're putting in place in your firewall as well. The multi-link VPN connectivity allows you to move away from the kind of cumbersome command line configuration of VPN connections from single locations to multiple locations, allowing for a significant cost saving when it comes to what resources I have and what type of communication, what type of configuration is required. The scheduled automated tasks you can do via whether it's policy updates, whether it's firmware updates or reporting, are all built in to ensure that operational efficiency is there for you. And from a situational awareness perspective, the data visualizations, the templates of the reporting and dashboards allow, with the drill down capabilities, allow very quick log investigation for your organization so that you can respond to intrusions and outages and getting to the bottom of what has happened as quickly as possible. So we've got just under 10 minutes. Hopefully I went as quickly as possible despite some of the issues with my phone. So I'm going to open up the floor to some of those questions, and I'll, if the moderator is here, we will.
Yep. Hi, Michael. Yeah, that was, like I said, that was very informative. Thanks so much. Yes, there are actually a couple of questions. I think so I just mentioned the first one. Actually, we've received quite a few requests from people to ask for a copy of your slides. So I think if they were to email you, they would be able to get a copy of the slides, yeah?
Absolutely, yes. So I don't know if my email address is provided, but it's mferguson@forcepoint.com. Very happy for people to reach out to myself, ask for the slides, and we will make sure that they are available for you.
Right, okay. Now, in the business value highlights, you had mentioned about bringing down security downtime. How are you quantifying downtime?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
How do you quantify downtime in the business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, ultimately, it's the business that's going to be having those issues. It really depends on the types of applications that you're using the network for. Downtime to me is the time between those two different communication points. If you have a particular data store and an application that is incapable of communicating to it, that actual piece of software is not operational. It may not even be visible to, if it's browser-based, then it might not be even visible to the user. But even if it's just, the information itself is inaccessible to the application, that to me is that system's down. So from the time it's down to making it operational again, it would be the way that I would quantify the downtime.
Right, okay. The next question we have is, you refer to NGFWs in the slides and in your talk. In your opinion, what do you consider as the key features or characteristics of a NGFW? What are the must-have features?
Great question. Okay, so at its most basic, or at its most fundamental, a next-generation firewall is a piece of infrastructure. It's a key piece of infrastructure that provides you with security. So how does it do that? It's a number of different ways, and those key features are those that are going to provide me with those features. So I have to have visibility into my applications that are being used and the users that are using them. That way I can put in place controls, which is the security way, to prevent or allow or audit the different communication channels. From an infrastructure perspective, that means it needs to be up, it needs to be robust, and it needs to be fault tolerant, and via the right clustering mechanisms, by the right fault tolerance capabilities, the ease of applying policies, and getting the information available. That's what I'm talking about from that security and infrastructure perspective. And unless either Sam or Matt wanted to add to that. Is there anyone that wanted to add to that question?
Yeah, this is Matt McKinley. I would say that traditionally next-gen firewalls are thought of in terms of basically a couple of things, which is application identification and user identification. And certainly that's true. But referring back to a lot of what Michael has said, that the firewall is also supposed to be an infrastructure device whose primary task is keeping the network up and running through clustering, keeping the internet up and running through the use of things like multi-link, and also having the capability of adding security like advanced normalization, being able to detect, correct, and alert on when somebody is attempting to evade the firewall. So I would say that the most important features of a next-gen firewall should be its ability to do what a firewall has always done, which is keep the network up and running at all costs, and layer on top of that incredibly accurate application identification, URL identification, and the ability to detect when somebody is deliberately attempting to circumvent the firewall.
All right, thanks for that. The next question that we
just
have,
on that, sorry, could I add to that?
Sure.
Because I've got could we just? I know that Sam wanted to circle back to quantifying of downtime as we, talk about being that critical piece of infrastructure. It could be worthwhile from a network administrator talking about how he quantifies downtime. So Sam, could you elaborate there?
Absolutely, Mike. And to add to your points earlier about defining critical applications within a business, it's very important to define, where your most critical assets lie within a business. What is most important for a business to define in a disaster recovery terminology are two things, and to do with data and time. The first to do with data would be your RPO, or your recovery point objective. As a business, you need to define what is an acceptable amount of data loss within a business. Now, a lot of people would come back, and organizations, and say, well, absolutely nothing, based on transactional business, whereas other businesses may come back and say, well, we don't actually mind losing 15 to 20 minutes worth of data, because whilst it's important to us, it's not critical. So the first there is your recovery point objective, and that's at which point in time are you prepared to recover data to. The second point is recovery time objective, and this is a unit defined by a business of how long, and arguably this is more important, of how long it is acceptable for your business operations to be down and out of commission. Now, this is typically defined in a sub-10 second sort of window, and most organizations will ask for sub-5 second windows. So defining both of those, RPO and RTO, to your business will allow you, as a network team, to determine the right SLA to give to the business, so that the expectation is set with a business, against how much time your business may be down for, and how much time your business may lose in data as well. That was it, Mike.
All right. Okay. So this is again from an administrator's point of view. When we talk about centralized management, so the question here is, how does the central IT review what was done by the remote site admins? When you're looking in an environment with back-to-back firewalls and remote site administration delegated out to remote site admins. And they go on to say, I understand that I would be able to access the remote firewalls and view the change audits. Other than this method of reviewing change, which is very much reactive, can the actions by remote site admins be recorded and be viewed in a playback manner?
So I can answer that question. This is Matt McKinley. So in our centralized management scheme, the way that it works is that there is one point of central administration, and multiple administrators can connect from anywhere to that system. Every single action that they do is recorded. It does not matter how minor that action is. Everything that they do is recorded, and anything that is done can be undone. And there are specific types of reports, and there's a specific type of log that allows you to track every single object. If any administrator logged in from anywhere does anything to any object, even if they log into to a firewall at the command line, for example, everything that they do is audited, and access control can be put in place so that no one administrator has the capability to do everything, limiting the scope of potential damage that any one administrator can do. So you can basically replay from beginning to end every action taken by an administrator, and the benefit to that is that if mistakes are made or anything of that nature, it can be tracked and undone step by step.
All right, thank you. We've slightly run over time, but if there are any more, I'm sure there are more questions. If the audience could just email Michael Ferguson, that's mferguson@ForcePoint, and I'm sure he'll be happy to respond to your question. If you need the presentation, you can also email him too. With that, I'd like to thank everyone and also the team from ForcePoint for actually presenting today. And for all the members, you will get one CPE, and it will be automatically added to your account. So with that, I'd say thank you, everyone, and I'll give the opportunity for Michael to say goodbye.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate your time today. And if you have any questions, you can always email me at mferguson@forcepoint.com. Thanks again.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Bye.